take the underlying Joe Biden narrative, which is that if you are Republican, you are threatening the lives of black people, and then extend that into COVID-19 because Donald Trump is president. If Barack Obama were president, let me just explain. If Barack Obama were president, there would still be a disproportionate number of black and Hispanic Americans dying. Some of that would be for obvious medical reasons, namely that obesity is a massive issue. It is particularly large. It's huge among whites. It's even bigger among minorities in America. And obesity is a massive confound when it comes to COVID-19. Also, there's an article from Fiona Mitchell over in The Lancet, which is, again, kind of the medical journal of record, talking about how vitamin D supplementation is a key here, that people who do not get enough vitamin D have been experiencing serious symptoms of coronavirus. Not only does that mean that if you're older and you don't get enough vitamin D, that it could have a real problem for you. According to The Lancet, quote, data from the UK Office for National Statistics shows that black people in England and Wales are more than 4 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than are white people. Is that because of American racism? So what we keep hearing from the media, as we'll see, is that black Americans are dying at a higher rate than white Americans because black Americans were victims of racism and continue to be victims of racism. There's an entire article in the New York Times today blaming slavery for differential rates of death from COVID-19. Then what about Britain? Why exactly are black people in England and Wales 4 times more likely to die from COVID-19? Well, The Lancet suggests black and minority ethnic people who are more likely to have vitamin D deficiency because they have darker skin seem to be worse affected than white people by COVID-19. So in other words, medical reasons would likely explain the differential. This, by the way, is also true of maternal mortality, not with regard to vitamin D, but with regard to obesity rates and premature birth. And maternal mortality rates are very, very different between black and white in America. They're also vastly different in Europe. Nobody ever seems to go across the water and notice the racial disparity, which would seemingly remove American racism as the unique cause of these sorts of disparities. That doesn't stop the New York Times from running a piece today called "It's Not Obesity, It's Slavery." We know why COVID-19 is killing so many black people. So you're going to have to explain why slavery, which technically ended in the United States in 1865, is going to have to do with the differential rate. I mean, 1865, last I checked, was 160 years ago. You're going to have to explain to me why that has to do with differential rates. And Sabrina Strings doesn't really bother. She just sort of says that it's not about obesity. She says the era of slavery was when white Americans determined that black Americans needed only the bare necessities, not enough to keep them optimally safe and healthy. It set in motion black people's diminished access to healthy foods, safe working conditions, medical treatment, and a host of other social inequities that negatively impact health. Okay, you can make this argument in like 1880. You can even make this argument during Jim Crow. You can make this argument in 1970, probably. You can't make this argument in 2020. It is now 55 years since the Civil Rights Act. At some point, you're going to have to say maybe people should just eat healthier. Maybe personal habits have something to do with differentials, with the differentials. Because let's be real about this. If you are a healthy young black person, you're dying of this at the same rate as a healthy young white person. If you're an unhealthy white person, you're also dying at this of higher rates. In other words, looking at the racial confound as though that is the key indicator is not right. Looking at the medical confounds as the key indicator would be right. But this plays into the Joe Biden narrative, which is that if he were president, black people would not be dying at as higher rate, which of course is silly. And Barack Obama would make the same argument. And then if we're pointed out that, by the way, people are going to die at the same rates regardless because the situation on the ground is the situation on the ground, then you just blame historic racism, which of course is connected with the evils of today's Donald Trump. You play this intellectually dishonest game where you say slavery equals Donald Trump. Therefore, slavery led to this. Therefore, Donald Trump is leading to it right now. And this is why this New York Times piece argues, despite the lack of clarity surrounding findings, one interpretation of the disparities is the idea that black people are unduly obese, which is seen as a driver of other chronic illnesses and is believed to put black people at high risk for serious complications from COVID-19. These claims have received intense media attention. According to CDC, 42.2% of white Americans and 49.6% of African Americans are obese. Researchers have yet to clarify how a 7 percentage point disparity in obesity prevalence translates to a 240% to 700% disparity in fatalities. Experts have raised questions about the rush to implicate obesity and especially severe obesity. Well, what about the other issues, the vitamin D issues? What about the fact that diabetes tends to run higher in the black community? What about eating habits, right? Not everybody who is obese has exactly the same sort of medical issues. In other words, trying to blame this on slavery is a bit of a stretch. And then, of course, this person in the New York Times blames the 1619 Project. So this is the goal here. The goal is that in order to target Republicans as the root of all evil, you're going to suggest that slavery is the root of all evil and that every outlier is every bad situation in America, every racist situation in America is an indicator of deep American evil, not a situation in which you can look and you can actually see in real time as good-hearted Americans on all sides of the aisle condemn the racism. It's easier to move into the idea that America is deeply racist because people are dying at differential rates of COVID.